Why do we use a torque wrench? We use a torque wrench for a number of different reasons. One of the biggest reasons is so that the fastener is tightened to the correct torque or stretch of the bolt. We have all of our torque wrenches laid out on the bench here, and we're going to talk a little bit about each wrench, what it's used for, when I would use it, and when I would choose something different. So the first style that we're going to look at is the twist handle style. These I use daily. They're the kind of torque wrench that I use in the car when I'm servicing it, and I'm a little bit rougher with these. They're typically still accurate, but not as big a deal as far as when you're working inside the engine compartment and you need to kind of bang them around. These ones are adjusted by loosening a lock on the back and then twisting the torque wrench to change the scale. The scale on these is usually listed in both Newton meters and foot-pounds. Usually for the cars that we're working on, the ones we're interested in are Newton meters. Though if you're comfortable with working in foot-pounds, you can do that too. So we have our 911 SC on the rack, and I want to show some applications of using a torque wrench. We're going to show tightening the valve cover nuts on the 911 SC. Now these nuts on this side have somewhat limited access. We've got hoses, we've got body, we've got a tire in the way. So we want to choose an extension that is going to best serve the tightening torque that we're trying to achieve while still being able to give us access. So if we go with the longest extension in our toolbox, which easily gets onto the nut, gives us uninhibited turning space, we can tighten the nut down until it clicks in one smooth motion, but have we actually applied the correct torque? Now we're going to look at it using a 6-inch extension, which is much better sized in that we can still get in and clear our pipes, our exhaust, still clear the tire. And we're going to try the same nut again. So I've got my torque wrench, same setting, nothing's changed. And we can see how the nut actually tightened a little more before it clicked. And that was because of the torsional twist of the long extension. On the left side, it's a different story because we have our exhaust right in the way. But the good thing is on this side is we can use just a straight, plain 3/8 drive socket that will come straight onto the fastener and allow us to get our torque setting too. The next one is going to be my 1/2-inch torque wrench, and this is the one that I use for checking lug nut torques, basic torques on larger style bolts. Once again, this one locks and unlocks right here and is twisted up to the desired torque. This one is a snap-on, so it's in foot-pounds, and if you need to convert that to Newton meters, you'll need to do that before using the torque wrench. Okay, we're going to go through and tighten the lug nuts on this car. First I'm going to do is set the torque wrench. This one has a tightening torque of 130 Newton meters, and that translates to about 95 foot-pounds. So I'm going to screw the torque wrench up until we get to our 90 foot-pound range. Which is going to be right there. So I've got the 0 and it's on 90 foot-pounds, and we've got the 100 scale here. So I'm just going to bring it up an additional 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to lock the handle. Okay, so we've got the wheel on the car, we've got the lug nuts run down so they're just finger tight. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our torque wrench onto the first nut, and we want to, in one smooth motion, holding the handle back here, push down and stop immediately as soon as the wrench stops. And then if we move to the next one, we're going to do the same thing where we're pushing down. Now we want to have it where we're pushing the torque wrench. That way we can use our body weight to be able to push down and lock and help us lock the nut down. The other thing we want to do is we want to stop as soon as it clicks. We don't need to keep doing that or pushing past the torque because we think we need to give it a little bit more. We need to adhere strictly to what the tightening torques for the wheel are. So we're just going to go ahead and retighten the rest. Now we can, if we want, come around and check, make sure that we haven't missed any, and we'll see that the wrench will click without moving at all. Make sure when you're finished to unlock the torque wrench, wind it back down to the stop position. The next one is our small quarter drive torque wrench. This one is a more accurate unit. It's designed for smaller fasteners, so those are going to be the M4s, M5s, M6 range of fastener. This one is in two scales. It has Newton meters on one side and it has inch pounds on the other side. Maybe a little hard to see in the camera. It's adjusted by holding back this lock, twisting to the desired torque, and then using it at that torque. Once again, this one needs to be backed off whenever the torque wrench is stored. Now that we've got all the nuts run down, we're going to use our quarter drive torque wrench. These are going to be tightened to 6 Newton meters. I've already gone ahead and set my torque wrench. So we're just going to carefully pick those up. Same thing with a crisscross pattern, just to keep everything coming down nice and level. These two are a different type of torque wrench in the way that they are adjusted. These have a specific lock on the side. You unlock them and there is a scale, and by twisting the scale you can set the desired torque. These are a lot more accurate in their usage and a lot more accurate with their torque. So these ones I usually reserve for doing engine work or transmission work where my torque values need to be very, very accurate. I have two 3/8 drive torque wrenches. One is red and one is blue. The biggest difference between the two, though they're essentially the same, is this torque wrench in the red has a larger scale of adjustment. The larger the scale of adjustment, the less accurate the torque wrench is going to be in percentage-wise. This torque wrench is going to be very accurate in the ranges that I need to use it. It is best to keep the torque wrench within its 80% usable range. That means staying away from the bottom 10% and the top 10% of its range. The next one is my 1/2-inch drive. This is also a snap-on. Same design as the 3/8 drive units in that it's a side locker. Twist to adjust the values right here, and then to lock it and use it, you just lock it down. Now these, you don't have to set them at 0. They can be left anywhere because of the style of adjustment wheel that they use. This one I use for higher torque values that are outside the realm of the 3/8 drive and are also matched to a socket, so I'm going to use a larger, typically industrial style socket, which is going to be a direct 1/2-inch drive socket. One of the other things that you will have to consider is if you're using a crow's foot or anything that extends the range of the torque wrench, you want to make sure that you do not use it like so, because you're extending the pivot point, so the center of the bolt is now out here. and that is going to change the torque that you have indicated on the torque wrench. These have to be torqued at 90 degrees to the torque wrench itself. That way the torque setting that you place on the torque wrench will be the same on the fastener that you're trying to tighten versus if you have it out here, where in which case there is a formula available for it, and you can calculate. So if there's no other way other than this direction, you will need to do some math to calculate the exact torque setting. Okay. The last one on the clicker style torque wrenches is our 3/4 drive. This one is designed to take different types of lengths of tubes so you can adjust the usable range of the torque wrench. It is adjusted using the same lock and twist method that allows you to just twist to the desired torque, and then locked in place and ready for use. And this particular one is used primarily on the rear axle nuts of a 911 or 356, or the gland nuts on the 912 and 356 engines. In our toolbox are the torque meters. Now these have some different usages. These are a very accurate meter and they do not click. The way that these are designed to be used is as you use the torque wrench and you're applying pressure to the fastener, it will wind up and cause the needle to move. You can see I'm just moving it there. To use it as a torque wrench, we would watch this scale as it rotates, and then we would stop at our desired point. The other way that these meters are used are in transmissions or steering rebuilds, where we need to measure the preload setting of a tapered roller bearing, for example, where we can actually rotate these and measure the rotational force. These torque wrenches will work in both directions, both backwards and forwards, and are very accurate. They're not really for general service or general tightening a cylinder head down though. Next thing I'm going to do is use a drag meter. And this is going to measure the amount of running torque that I have on our actual side bearings. Zero my pointer. And I want to take that running torque, not the starting torque, but the actual running torque. So I want to look at it as I'm rotating. And I'm going to reset my pointer so I've got a fairly accurate reading. So right now we are running at a bearing preload, it looks like around 22 inch-pounds, or in Newton meters about 2.5 Newton meters of running drag. So I'm just going to compare that to our specifications and see where we should be. One last style of torque wrench that's used on some cars, in particular the 3.2 liter 911 Carreras use a torque angle method. What they are doing is you will tighten, for example, the head studs will be tightened up to a starting torque that's usually much lower. So for a 10 millimeter bolt, a 911 is normally 33 to 35 Newton meters on the head stud torque. On a 3.2 liter, what you're going to do is you're going to tighten the bolt to, I think it's 18 Newton meters, and then you're going to do a torque angle. The way this works is you apply this stop that comes in, and you would lock it against somewhere in the engine. And so this is held securely. This part is going to be attached to your socket that's on the head nut. And then when you rotate, you're actually going to rotate to the tightening torque. So it'll be 18 Newton meters and then it'll say 60 degrees. In which case, as you twist it, the scale moves to 60, and so you know how much of an angle that you're placing on it. So I have just a Allen head bolt and a steel piece that has a metric thread cut in it, and we're going to put it in the vise. And all we're going to do for right now, this is clean and dry. There is no oil on the threads or under the head of the bolt, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. So first I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and screw this in. And because we don't want to use our torque wrench like a ratchet, we want to screw it up until it contacts and it's ready to be torqued. On this particular one, I'm just going to use a torque setting of 25 Newton meters, and it might be a little bit hard to see that. When we're torquing a bolt, you want to make sure that the socket or the Allen wrench is on clearly. Our hand needs to be out here at these knurls. These knurls are where you're actually designed to be held. And then what we're going to do is we want to pull the torque wrench towards us until it clicks. As soon as it clicks, we want to stop. Now you see guys that will come in and want to bump it. We don't want to do that. We want a nice, smooth, fluid motion, and that hits the desired torque in one shot. You can, if you have to, like if you have to go back and get another bite because you didn't quite make it in one, if it cracks off immediately, then I would loosen the bolt and start again. So being smooth and consistent with your movements are very beneficial. Now the other reason why we want to pull towards us, if this was a high torque and I'm pushing as hard as I can with this hand, if something happens, the socket fails or it comes off, what will happen is we'll tend to fall into whatever we're tightening. Not a big deal at 25 Newton meters, but if you were tightening something that was 150 Newton meters or 120 Newton meters, like the camshaft nut on a 911 engine, this becomes a problem. So you always want to pull towards you, use your body weight so you can lean back into it and get that smooth motion. Okay. I am just going to place a Sharpie mark on this bolt. I'm going to bring it down so we can see exactly where it tightened up. Now, taking my ratchet, because we never use a torque wrench to undo a fastener, we only use them to tighten. I'm going to undo our bolt, and the only thing that I am going to change is, instead of everything being clean and dry, I'm going to apply some oil, and this is just ATF or automatic transmission oil, to just the threads of the bolt, and I'm going to screw it back in. Now if we look on this side, you can see before we tighten it how far away our mark is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our torque wrench, haven't made any changes to the setting, so it's still set at 25 Newton meters, and I'm just going to apply the same torque. If I look at our line now, we can see that it has tightened a little bit tighter. Not a huge amount, but it has still applied more clamping force just by adding oil to just the threads. So next, I'm going to pull the bolt out again. And this time, I'm going to make sure that I apply a little bit of oil around the head of the bolt as well as under the bolt itself. Screw it back in. Once again, torque wrench is still the same setting. And we've got a little bit more movement on the line out of that bolt. Now, why this is happening is friction. Because we are using a torque wrench to effectively measure clamping force, the way the torque wrench is measuring it is rotational force. So as you're screwing the bolt in, it's measuring the amount of drag that is on that bolt. And it says that for 25 Newton meters, when it hits that pre-calibrated drag, it is going to click off. Now, when you put something together that's clean, has no oil, what's happening is you're measuring friction between the threads, and that friction will change your actual torque. So you can have a good quality torque wrench, use all the correct methods, but still get a torque reading that is too low because of friction. The next thing when you're using your torque wrench, you want to try and use sockets that are a 6-point design socket, and that means that it has 6 individual flats versus, say, a 12-point where it has multiple directions or multiple areas where the nut can sit. This will give you much better clamping force against the sides or the flats of the nut. Not such a big deal on low torque items, but especially this is a 36 millimeter. This is when you're doing the gland nut on a 912 or a 356 engine that has a lot of torque. You want to make sure that you're using a good quality socket and as short a one as possible. Where to find the torque values? We have a number of sources to look for torque values. The toolbox version of the shop manual, which is going to be a condensed version of the larger manual. These contain our torque values as per model, so they're broken down into year, make, and models and different categories like that. They'll have engine, transaxle, brake system. We have these toolbox cards that we make up. These contain the same information that's in these small manuals. They're just on a laminated sheet, a little bit bigger and easier to read. Availability on these is getting a little tough these days. Then the ultimate source would be the complete factory manual set. The factory manual is going to show a lot more detail on the system that you're working on. This one happens to be the strainer plate on the bottom of a 911. It's going to give you the tightening torque of the nuts, and it's also going to give you any other pertinent information that you need to know about putting that system together. The last place is online. The online sources, if you type in and search what is the nut torque for into the fastener here, you have to take that information with a grain of salt. It is not guaranteed to be correct. Forums often are incorrect or are too broad with the torques that they come up, and often it can be an opinion instead of a fact. After you've finished using your torque wrench, you want to make sure that you clean it by wiping it down, then store it in the case that it came with. Torque wrenches are a precision instrument that will need to be calibrated from time to time. The torque wrench industry recommends every 5,000 clicks or 12 months. However, if you're only using your torque wrench a couple of times a year, then I would only recheck calibration every few years. As far as buying a torque wrench, the price range of a torque wrench will vary greatly, but you do get what you pay for. When I'm looking at buying a torque wrench, I look at the manufacturer and their history. I look for a company that has been making torque wrenches for a long time, and usually those kinds of companies are going to deliver a good product. Buying from a company like Snap-on or Mac Tools, you'll generally get a good wrench. Buying something from Harbor Freight or your local auto parts store may not end up with a very good quality wrench, and it may not give reliable or long-term service.